Hello, my name is Malcolm Saunders and I have a special guest with me, Latifa Pelletier-Ahmed of ALCLA, a native plant nursery here based in Calgary, Alberta, as well as of Latifa's Herbs. She's a trained medical herbalist, but now focuses her time and attention towards native plants and running this native plant nursery. So thanks for having me out here. And I want to bring up, because she's one of the key people, along with Julie Walker, a colleague of ours, that kind of alerted me to this really massive problem that we have in the plains, the prairies, and this extends just beyond the Calgary area, but across the land, wherever you might be tuning in. I challenge you to kind of re-look at your local area. So folks will often go to parks in Calgary, like Glenmore Reservoir, Edworthy Park, Nose Hill even, and go, oh yeah, looks like a pretty, even here looks like a pretty wild place, lots of plants, But upon further inspection through the lens of somebody's eyes, like Latifa's, there's actually a really big problem here.
Yeah, thank you, Malcolm. Exactly. So what we're seeing behind us might look like a lot of species, but really there's only a couple species here. The most dominant one being this smooth brome, an invasive grass. And then we have wormwood and some tumbleweed mustard. None of the species here are native. So many of the landscapes that we actually perceive as being prairie are not actually prairie. They're either tame prairie, so the area was totally, all the native species were removed. They're talking millions of species massacred, murdered, really, if you want to put it that way, without any regard for their integrate value, and replaced with just one or two species that were considered superior historically for whatever reason. Brome, for example, has a high protein content, so is considered useful for cattle, but has spread so aggressively and so prolifically, it encroaches into remaining native prairie, which is one of, native temperate prairie is considered one of the most endangered ecosystems worldwide and the least protected. And so has just sort of is filling in these spaces and encroaching on is not actually native prairie, but is encroaching on existing native plants that are also at risk. So
yeah, I mean, a lot of people will go to BC and it's like big trees, like big nature, and it's like, oh, it's awesome.
Yeah.
And then you come back to Alberta and it's like, oh, it's just flat, it's just grass. But you talk about native prairie, one of the most endangered ecosystems, like, it's beautiful, it's diverse, and most people actually haven't really experienced it. There's very, 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 very few pockets, not only in the city, but of course outside of it as well, where there's a representation of true native prairie.
Absolutely, right? So Nose Hill is a great example. You can visit that space. There is some native prairie, but have a closer look, see how many areas are encroached by invasive species like brome grass. Just huge areas, and you'll see very low diversity where that grass is growing. Again, you get thistle and other weeds coming in, and so these areas are endangered because, again, they've been replaced by agriculture. People will drive out in the country and they're saying, oh, I'm looking at prairie, but actually you're looking at a crop field of canola or wheat or whatever it is that's growing there. That's not prairie. Okay, that is an industrial practice, and the way it interacts with the landscape is not that different from mining, right? Agriculture is a form of land mining that takes resources and puts them into something usable, but isn't actually putting anything back into the environment in a healthy way. It's certainly not large scale industrial kind of practices. Now, ranching can be beneficial, can coexist with the prairie, but a lot of sites are heavily overgrazed. Rare and endangered species are extinct in those areas because the cattle are grazing. Many plants cannot withstand that kind of heavy grazing. So, we're not actually seeing swaths of prairie. There's really nowhere you can go where you can really see huge extensions of prairie when you're driving along. Like, that just doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, so we'll get into suggestions of what you can do to kind of help turn the tide. I think awareness is number one. But before we do that, let's talk about the importance that these native species play in the ecosystem and why this should even be a concern.
Well, native species are the main drivers for biodiversity, right? So when we're saying, what does it mean to lose all these different species? Well, we're losing not only those individual species that have intrinsic value, but they are feeding all the other wildlife. So our birds and bees, butterflies, all our native species. We have over, for example, 2,000 species of native moths. Many of these species have very specific associations with native plants only. You know, they can't lay their eggs on all this grass. You're gonna see very low species diversity in these tame pastures, or definitely in a cropland. There's gonna be very low species diversity. Since the 1970s in North America, there has been a decline of 3 billion birds. We've lost that many birds due to habitat loss. So again, the main food of birds, it's not bird seed, it's insects. Okay, bird seed is.
I love that. Yeah.
Okay, so you know they're insectivores. So where are they going to get? You know, a clutch of chickadees requires between 5 and 9,000 single caterpillars. I don't know if folks know that. And then you know, there's been studies that show there's a 90% decline in caterpillar abundance on non-native areas. 90% decline.
Wow.
So that's massive. So, and people love native birds like chickadees, but if you really want to support them, the best way to do that is to provide the plants and restore the vegetation that actually supports those species.
So this is probably one of the reasons that you got into the work that you're doing now. You know, not only from your background as a herbalist, like you say, kind of really identifying the intrinsic value that these plants that grow in this ecosystem have. I know you've got relationships with the indigenous people here and beginning to learn about, you know, the plants that they knew that were integral to who they are as a people and their lifestyle. I mean, and that's completely interrelated. Mm-hmm. So your work with ALCLA, tell us a little bit about that and how folks can kind of help, you know, beyond awareness now that we know, like how can we begin to kind of turn the tide against this monoculture of industrialized species, introduced species that seem to be taking over?
So I think first thing is just really critical is awareness, right? Once you start to open your eyes, and I highly recommend, you know, getting apps like iNaturalist or joining groups or joining a plant walk with Malcolm. So you can helps you to start to see those species, because if you've never done that before, there can be a barrier. So just educating yourself, opening your eyes. There's so many resources now to support us in learning and engaging and reconnecting back with nature, which is so essential for our health and well-being. And then as a nursery, we collect we have over 150 species of grasses, shrubs, and wildflowers. We collect the species locally to make sure that we're preserving remaining stands of native prairie. I mean, sometimes you get a tiny little patch of prairie left. It's just the side of a roadside, and we'll collect seed there with the hope that we can, instead of losing that genetic diversity, which, you know, once it's gone, that's completely lost. We can't recover that. We try and salvage as much as possible where in disturbed areas to help to recover and to keep that genetic diversity alive. And then you can reestablish those plants. And the wonderful thing about growing native species, they're drought tolerant. They're low maintenance. They support wildlife. You will start seeing, it's something you can visibly see. You'll start seeing insects you didn't even know exist. I was born here, and every year I see insects that I haven't seen in 35 plus years, because I grew up in a sterilized world surrounded by weeds. And once I start seeing those native species come back, it's so beautiful. So if you have kids, families, just the enrichment, and then you get a greater microbial diversity. We're not visibly seeing that, but there's so much research on how health is impacted by microbes. And guess what? We get so many of our microbes from plants and soil. So we're rebuilding that health diversity, right? There's actually studies that show there's fewer allergies in children who grow up around native plants.
Amazing.
like less eczema as compared to growing around invasive species. So that's because of better diversity of microbes, beneficial microbes on the skin. So there's all these things that we're not visibly seeing that are impacting our health. And then we can have the health benefits of having wild food, again, that we don't have to irrigate, just grows prolifically. We can have nettle. Like I'm a huge nettle fan. I'm sure you are too.
Totally.
And that's way before everyone else is still getting greens from the grocery store. I've got my huge harvest of nettle from my garden. Comes back prolifically every year. So we have these wonderful, abundant native foods, medicines, just endless. All these plants have medicinal value. And then, of course, supporting indigenous communities, decolonizing our gardens and spaces. And it's so enriching to really connect with the 10,000 plus year history of the land. Is so valuable, so rich. And again, it really helps us to connect to place in a deeper way. So the benefits, there's no negatives to growing native species. It's all benefits. It's all joy. And you're supporting, by reducing resources, we're really supporting a sustainable future that our children can grow up in, that they can have somewhere safe to live. We require biodiversity. Our existence as a species depends on all the species around us. And we have to see that to value them, if that makes sense.
Cool. No, I love that. That's amazing. And, for those of you like myself, as you get into the natural world, you get into plants, you start looking at plant medicine, you start learning about, past cultures, traditional cultures, and how they have successfully, maintained wellness through their interactions with the natural world. There's always this idea of reciprocity, that comes back. Okay, how can I give back, right? Versus just taking, like, oh, plant walk, I'm just gonna pull all these plants up, and there's a time and a place for that. There's, we need things from the land, but how do you give back? And this is something that I've come to among many other practices, is like, this is a way to give back. And I've got my little yard that was once just a monoculture of grass, and we dug it up, right? And we've been planting so many different varieties of species. And I know it's a very small drop in the bucket, but if we all did that, or 20% of us, right? Like, that's a huge shift.
A huge impact, a small, you could support thousands of insects in a tiny area as opposed to nothing.
Yeah.
Which is what a lawn grass supports, right? A classical lawn. Plus it's heavy on inputs, oil and gas, needing to be cut, energy, water, and so forth. So.
Oh, totally. So, yeah, love this, and thank you so much for what you're doing. Latifa is definitely a source of the native plants that I've been putting back into the ground. So you can reach her. You want to tell folks how they can connect with you?
Yeah, so we are called ALCLA Native Plants, or ALCLA Native Plants. We have a website. We have a database that tells you all about the species that we carry, how they grow, what conditions they like. You can actually purchase online now and pick them up from our nursery. We're currently located in Bear's Paw, and so you can also order seeds as well, and reach out, you can give us a call, send us an email. We can help you out if you have questions about your project or need support, or aren't really sure what to do. We can definitely give you suggestions on what to do. So yeah, we're definitely here as a support and resource. And myself, and I also can tell you, what are the edible native species, what are the medicinal native species, if you're interested in incorporating those fabulous, powerful medicines into your garden. So yeah.
All right, well, let's leave folks with a little kind of homework, a little project they can do apart from connecting with you and digging up their lawn and putting a native species. Let's, just, again, it's just an awareness shift. So next time you're out, in your neighborhood, in a park, a beautiful area that you think is quite wild, quite natural, as Latifa did here, just do an assessment, just look around, right? We identified the brome grass, the wormwood, the mustard, there's dandelion. We would be hard pressed to come up with 12 species, like really hard. Like, okay, if we comb the ground, okay, maybe we get to 10, right? In a native, so if this was native wild prairie, how many species?
Hundreds of species.
Hundreds.
You would walk a meter and you would just see so many different species, including lichens, moss, so many insects, birds, mammals. Many of these, again, are endangered. We've already have a number of species extinct in the province, right? Kit fox, the black-footed ferret, which the Blackfoot are named after. From my understanding, I was told that the species aren't extinct from our province. They historically lived here. We want to bring these species back, or we have to provide space for them. We have to give them a home. So.
Cool. Right on. Well, thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Malcolm.
Yeah, thanks everybody for watching, tuning
everyone.
in. Please give this a like, share it out. Super important because it's very, very low on the awareness. One more point I want to make. Last time we were chatting, you mentioned about, like the city. We won't get too political here, but just something like the total like ridiculous mentality, you know, like, so tell us about lawns and one of the restrictions.
Yeah, it was so interesting. So I just had a client come in today. He's like, I really want to have a beautiful native prairie in my front lawn. And I had to break the news to him. Guess what? It's actually illegal to have native prairie in your front lawn because you can't have, you know, I have to double check the measurement, but I think it's about 12 centimeters. Anyways, there's a height limit on what you're allowed your grass to be. So you legally have to mow it. If you actually tried to put in native grass species, which of course would be taller, you could be ripped out by bylaw. So unfortunately, there's a bit of a disconnect in terms of how our bylaws are managing our yard spaces. They're forcing us to continue on in this heavily energy intensive, mowing, water intensive pathway, which offers no benefit for wildlife at all. Versus actually being able to have a low maintenance, no water, no mow, you know, pollinator haven. So that's, you know, one of the issues. So
Yeah, no, totally. And just to kind of add on that, I'd love to see, you know, like there's a time and a place for a field, right? Like to play football, to play soccer, these kinds of things.
Of course,
great,
yeah.
let's have those spots. But, you know, I live on the edge of a, you know, it's a bit of a sloping down. They come and they mow it every couple of weeks, right? It's like, let's dig that up, you know, like these spaces that get created, let's have areas for recreation, but then, you know, the other parts, like let's renaturalize that, truly, actually.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, so it's got to take this kind of shift. So thanks for all that you're doing to help create that shift, that paradigm consciousness. Thanks everybody again for watching, taking this on and doing what you can.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Bye for now.
Bye.